They threw her from the cliff to die, but the Alpha King waited below. The glittering halls of her father's castle were full of whispers and knives, each word sharp enough to cut through the heart if spoken at the wrong time. But nothing had prepared her for the betrayal that came on a day when the sky itself seemed to turn against her. The wind howled across the jagged cliffs that overlooked the dark waters below, carrying with it the scent of rain and danger. Seraphine's hands gripped the rough stone of the balcony as she looked down. Her heart pounded, not from fear, but from disbelief. She had trusted them, her own blood, her supposed allies, and they had delivered her to this edge with lies and accusations. "You've served your purpose, Seraphine," sneered Lord Merrick, her cousin, his face twisted with a cruel satisfaction. "But now your life ends here. The kingdom cannot tolerate treachery." Her chest rose and fell, but the words felt distant, like echoes in a dream. She wanted to fight, to argue, to call for mercy, but she knew that no plea would reach them. They had already decided her fate. "You'll regret this," she whispered, but no one heard. Two men shoved her forward. The air tore at her hair as she slipped from the stone balcony, falling into the nothingness below. The wind roared in her ears. Her body tumbled, weightless, and for a moment she thought she could embrace the freefall, escape the betrayals and whispers forever. And then a shadow rose beneath her. It was like the night had taken form, massive and terrifying, yet somehow beautiful. She landed not on the jagged rocks, but in the arms of a man who seemed to belong to the storm itself. His grip was firm, unyielding, yet there was a gentleness in the way he held her, like a king protecting his most prized secret. "You're alive," he said, his voice low and deep, carrying a power that made her heart tremble. "But do not move. The fall could have broken more than your bones." Seraphine tried to speak, but no words came. Her lungs burned and her mind raced. She looked up at him, tall, broad, with eyes like storm clouds and hair that fell around his shoulders like shadows. He was not a man of the court, nor of the lands she knew. He was something else entirely, something wild. Who are you?" she managed to whisper. "I am Kalen," he replied simply, almost as if he were stating a fact of nature. "And you should not have fallen from that cliff." Seraphine's fear wavered, replaced by something unnameable. He had saved her life, and yet she did not trust him. Her eyes searched for deceit, for cruelty hidden behind that calm face, but there was nothing. Only a quiet intensity that seemed to pierce straight into her soul. I do not understand," she said, pulling herself up as best she could. "Why would anyone save me?" Kalen's eyes softened slightly, but only slightly. "Because some fates are not yours to decide," he said, his voice almost a growl in the wind. "And some deaths are not meant to happen, not yet." He helped her to her feet, and the ground beneath her was unlike any she had known, soft with moss, shadowed by ancient trees whose roots tangled like serpents over the earth. The cliff above disappeared into mist. It was as if she had stepped into another world, a place where darkness ruled but life still clung with stubborn beauty. Seraphine's mind was a storm of confusion. She had trusted no one in her life, yet here was a man who had caught her from death itself. The sensation of being saved was strange and unwelcome, mingled with fear. She wanted to demand answers, to strike out in anger, but she was too exhausted to move. Kalen did not speak for a long moment. He led her through the forest in silence, his steps soundless against the thick carpet of leaves. The shadows seemed to bend around him, and Seraphine felt the uncanny sensation of being watched, not by creatures, but by the very forest itself. It was alive, and it respected him. Finally, they reached a fortress of dark stone, rising like a sentinel from the earth. Its towers were sharp as blades, and yet there was a strange beauty in its form. Torches burned along the walls, casting dancing shadows that seemed to whisper secrets she could not hear. "This is your home?" she asked, awe and suspicion tangled in her voice. Kalen nodded. "And it is safe, for now." The fortress was unlike any castle she had seen. There were no banners of kings or queens, no tapestries proclaiming victories. It was bare, almost severe, yet there was a sense of ancient power in every stone. Seraphine felt it pressing against her, testing her, as if the walls themselves judged her presence. "You must rest," Kaelin said, guiding her to a small chamber lit by flickering candles. "You have been marked by forces older than you know, and surviving the fall was only the beginning." Seraphine sat on the edge of the bed, her body shaking from the fall and from the rush of emotions she could not name. She wanted to ask about the curse he mentioned, about the shadow that seemed to cling to him, but her voice would not come. Instead, she studied him in silence. Kaelin watched her with an intensity that was almost unbearable. There was a weight to his gaze, a mixture of curiosity and caution, as if he were measuring not just her strength but the very essence of her soul. "You may trust me," he said finally, as if reading her thoughts, "but only if you are willing, nothing more." Seraphine's pride bristled. She had been betrayed once already. Could she trust a man she had just met, a man who seemed more like a force of nature than a human being? And yet, something in her stirred, something she had long buried beneath fear and duty. "Why did you save me?" she asked again, this time in a whisper that barely carried in the quiet room. Kaelin's jaw tightened, and he looked away toward the window where moonlight spilled like silver across the stone floor. "Because no life should end like yours. Not when there is more to be done, not when the storm is not yet complete." Seraphine felt a shiver run through her. His words were strange and cryptic, but there was truth in them, a promise she could feel in the bones of her body. She wanted to resist, to push him away, but exhaustion and relief chained her still. In the silence that followed, she allowed herself to look around the room, to breathe without the panic that had clawed at her chest. The candles flickered, casting long shadows that seemed to dance in celebration of her survival. For the first time that day, she felt a spark of hope, a fragile, trembling thing, but hope nonetheless. Hours passed and Kaelin did not leave. He stood in the corner, a silent guardian, a figure of shadow and strength. Seraphine wondered if he slept, if he felt weariness at all, or if he was something more than human, bound to the night itself. Finally, exhaustion overtook her. She sank into the bed, pulling the covers close around her. The warmth was comforting, yet she could not shake the feeling of being watched, measured, studied. Kaelin's presence was a weight on her mind and heart, a tension that neither fear nor gratitude could fully untangle. As sleep pulled her under, she dreamed of cliffs and storms, of eyes that glowed like lightning in the dark, and of a man who seemed to stand between death and life itself. She awoke to the faint sound of rain tapping against the window, the world outside still wild and untamed, but she was alive, and that was something she had almost forgotten how to feel. Morning came, and with it clarity. Seraphine knew she could not return to the castle, not yet, not with the betrayal of her family fresh in her mind. She could not forgive, perhaps, but she could survive. And she could learn from the man who had saved her. Kaelin entered her chamber as the sun broke through the clouds, bathing the fortress in pale light. "You survived the fall," he said, "but your journey has only begun. You must understand the curse that has touched you and the role you play in what is coming." Seraphine met his gaze, and for the first time she did not look away. The fear was still there, coiled like a serpent in her chest, but so was a fierce determination. She would learn, she would endure, she would not let betrayal define her. "And if I refuse?" she asked quietly, her voice steady despite the tremor of nerves beneath it. Kaelin's expression softened, though only slightly. "Then you will remain as you were before, and the fall may claim you another way. But you are alive now, Seraphine. That alone gives you power, that alone gives you choice." Her heart quickened at his words. She had a choice. She had a chance. And somewhere deep inside she felt the faint stirrings of something dangerous, something wild, something like hope. The wind howled outside the fortress once more, carrying with it the scent of rain and earth. Seraphine rose, steadying herself against the unfamiliar room, and took the first step toward a life she had not expected, a life in the shadow of the Alpha King, in a world she had not yet begun to understand. The cliff behind her was gone, erased by mist and distance. But the edge of destiny still loomed ahead, dark and impossible, and she would meet it, not as a victim but as a survivor. And Kaelin, the storm-bound king who had saved her, watched silently, knowing that the threads of their fates had just begun to entwine, and that neither of them would ever be the same again. The fortress of Kaelin lay hidden deep within the forest, surrounded by ancient trees that towered like silent sentinels. Mist curled between the roots and the stones, carrying the scent of moss and rain. It was a place outside time, where shadows moved with their own quiet purpose, and the wind whispered secrets that only the mountains understood. Lady Seraphine woke to a soft light seeping through the stone window of her small chamber. The room was simple, almost bare, yet it carried a strange sense of warmth. She rose slowly, her body still sore from the fall and the embrace of the Alpha King. Her mind was restless, filled with questions about the man who had saved her life and the strange forest fortress that now protected her. Kaelin had not spoken much since the morning after her fall. He moved through the fortress with quiet precision, tending to his duties as though the walls themselves obeyed him. Seraphine had watched him from her window, noting the way his presence seemed to command the shadows around him, bending the light and darkness with every step. Her first attempt to speak to him was cautious. "Kaelin," she said softly, stepping into the corridor. I need to understand. Why me? Why save me from the cliff when my own blood wanted me dead?" Kaelin paused, his silhouette outlined against the fading morning light. He did not turn at first, then slowly faced her. His eyes, like storm clouds, held an unreadable depth. "Because your life matters," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper carried on the wind. "And because the forces that threaten you and me do not allow death before their time." Seraphine's brows furrowed. "Forces? What do you mean?" He stepped closer, the shadows bending slightly around him as if the fortress itself recognized his presence. "There are powers older than the kingdom, older than the bloodlines that seek to destroy you. You are marked by a curse, Seraphine, a curse that awakens the darkness in people and tests the strength of their hearts. That curse is why your enemies could not take you easily, and why I was drawn to you." Seraphine's heart skipped a beat. A curse. She had survived the fall, yet her mind could not yet grasp the meaning of his words. She had always been practical, trained in the arts of diplomacy and observation, but magic and curses were foreign to her. Still, something in Kaelin's tone told her he spoke the truth. "Marked by a curse," she whispered. "Then what does it mean for me?" Kaelin's eyes softened, a fleeting vulnerability showing through the intensity of his stormy gaze. "It means your life is no longer solely yours. It is bound to the shadows and the wild, to the storm and the earth, and it is bound to me." Seraphine's pulse quickened. She had not expected to hear such words, nor to feel the strange tug of fear and fascination in their meaning. Kaelin's presence was commanding, yet oddly protective, like the fortress itself had taken her under its wing. She wanted to resist, to push him away, but her body and mind betrayed her. "Why me?" she asked again, this time quieter, almost to herself. Kaelin's lips pressed into a thin line, and for a moment he looked away. "Because you are strong," he said finally. "And because I see in you something I thought lost in the world, courage, spirit, and a heart that can survive the storm." The tension between them was palpable, a mixture of fear, curiosity, and something she could not name. Seraphine wanted to trust him, yet every instinct told her caution. She had survived betrayal once already. She could not afford to let herself fall into another trap, no matter how alluring or protective it seemed. Kaelin, sensing her hesitation, did not force the matter. Instead, he extended a hand. "Walk with me. Learn what the forest teaches. There is more to your survival than you know, and you will need every lesson if you wish to stand against what is coming." Reluctantly, Seraphine accepted. Together, they stepped into the misty forest. The air was cool, damp, and heavy, with the scent of earth and rain. Every step Seraphine took seemed to echo in the stillness, every shadow flickering like a living creature. She noticed the way the forest responded to Kalen, how the branches bent slightly at his approach, how even the wind seemed to part around him. He was not merely a man. He was a force of nature, an alpha king whose power touched everything around him. "Why do you live here?" she asked after a long silence, her voice breaking the quiet. "Why not rule a kingdom like the ones I know?" Kalen's gaze swept the trees, dark and distant. "Because kingdoms are weak and kings are bound by their fears. The wild obeys only strength and truth, and here I am free, free to guard what matters." Seraphine considered this. Her world had always been filled with rules, etiquette, and politics. Power had always been measured in titles and armies. Here she felt something different, a raw, primal sense of authority, tempered by care and restraint. She did not understand it fully, but she sensed its importance. Days passed in the fortress, and with each passing hour, Seraphine's understanding of the world she had entered deepened. Kalen trained her not only in survival, but in perception, teaching her to notice the subtle signs in the forest, the movement of shadows, the patterns of the wind, the whispers of animals. She discovered a resilience she had never known, and a courage that surprised even herself. Yet, even as she learned, the tension between them grew. Every interaction carried weight, every glance was heavy with unspoken meaning. Kalen's presence was a constant force, sometimes comforting, sometimes frightening. Seraphine felt her heart respond in ways she did not understand, caught between awe, fear, and a strange attraction she could neither name nor deny. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the jagged peaks surrounding the fortress, a distant howl echoed through the trees. Seraphine froze, the hair on her arms standing on end. Kalen's hand was suddenly on her shoulder, steadying, protective. "They are near," he said, his voice sharp as steel. "The men who tried to kill you, they have not forgotten." Seraphine's stomach churned. Her enemies, those who had thrown her from the cliff, were still hunting her. "But how do they know where I am?" she asked, fear threading her words. Kalen's eyes darkened. "Some betrayals reach farther than the eye can see. They will come for you, Seraphine. And if they find you unprepared." His voice trailed off, leaving the threat hanging in the air like mist over the forest. The thought of her enemies hunting her again stirred a mix of fear and determination. She had survived once, and she would survive again. But now, with Kalen by her side, she sensed a strength she had never known, a strength born of partnership, trust, and something far deeper than mere survival. That night, Seraphine could not sleep. She lay awake, listening to the wind swirl around the fortress, and thinking of Kalen, of the storm in his eyes, of the way he had saved her and yet kept a part of himself hidden. She wondered if she would ever truly know him, or if his secrets would always keep her at a distance. Morning brought clarity. Kalen found her on the balcony, looking out at the forest bathed in dawn light. "The time has come," he said. "You must face the world that seeks to destroy you. You cannot hide forever, and you cannot survive alone, but together." His gaze met hers, and for a moment the shadows fell away. "Together, we are stronger than they imagine." Seraphine nodded, determination rising in her chest. She had feared the fall, feared the curse, feared the unknown. But she would no longer fear herself, nor the power that lingered in the shadows. She would fight. She would endure. She would rise. As they prepared to leave the safety of the fortress, a messenger arrived, a hawk carrying a small scroll tied to its leg. Seraphine's hands trembled as she untied it and read the message. Her heart sank. It was from her cousin, Lord Merrick. The words were simple, but the threat behind them was unmistakable. "We will finish what we started. You cannot hide forever, Seraphine. Come back if you dare." Kalen read over her shoulder, his eyes narrowing. They are bold, too bold. We must move quickly. You have grown stronger, but strength alone will not protect you. Seraphine met his gaze, and for the first time she felt not fear but resolve. Then we fight, she said, her voice steady. We will face them together. Kalen's lips curved slightly, a shadow of a smile. Good. You are learning, Seraphine, and soon you will understand the full measure of what it means to survive and to command your destiny. As they rode toward the edge of the forest, the wind whipping around them, Seraphine felt a strange exhilaration. The hunt was coming. The danger was near, but so too was the power within her, the bond with Kalen, and the promise of a life she could no longer imagine losing. And in the shadows of the trees, unseen and silent, the eyes of her enemies watched, waiting for the moment to strike, and unaware that the bond they sought to break was already forging a force they could not control. The forest whispered secrets, the wind carried warnings, and Seraphine rode beside the Alpha King, knowing that nothing would ever be the same again. The kingdom lay in shadow, its once proud towers now dulled by neglect and fear. Smoke rose from distant villages, and the streets were quiet, filled only with whispers of treachery and rumor. Lady Seraphine had returned with Kalen, not as a captive, but as a survivor, a warrior shaped by the forests, storms, and shadows of the Alpha King's world. The castle gates loomed before them, gray and imposing. Guards, who once bowed in her family's presence, now stepped aside with uncertain fear. Seraphine's heart pounded in her chest. Every stone of this place carried memories of betrayal, of whispered plots, of knives hidden in smiles. And yet, she was not alone. Kalen's presence beside her was a steadying force, a dark shield that seemed to bend even the light around them. We enter cautiously, Kalen whispered, his hand brushing hers in a fleeting gesture of reassurance. They will test us, Seraphine, but we are no longer the same as when they threw you from the cliff. They underestimate you, and me. Seraphine nodded. She had learned much in the forest, how to read the faintest signs of danger, how to move silently, how to feel the pulse of the world around her. Yet nothing had prepared her for the tension that filled the castle, the way the air seemed charged with accusation and suspicion. Inside, the throne room stretched vast and empty. The walls bore the marks of history, tapestries faded, banners torn. But even in decay, the weight of power lingered. Lord Merrick waited there, his posture arrogant, a smirk twisting his lips as if he had already won. "So the little lamb returns," he said, his voice echoing through the hall, "and she brings a wild beast with her." Kalen stepped forward, tall and unyielding, shadows moving around him like living armor. "I am no beast," he said, his voice a low, controlled rumble. "But you will find that the forest has taught her strength, and that strength is not yours to command." Seraphine felt a surge of courage at his words. She had once trembled in the face of Lord Merrick, had once relied on diplomacy and cunning to survive the smallest of threats. Now she stood beside Kalen, a force shaped by shadows, storms, and survival itself. "You overestimate your power," Merrick said, but his smile faltered just slightly. There was a flicker of unease, though he tried to hide it. "This kingdom has rules, laws. The people will not follow a creature from the wild, no matter how strong he is." Kalen's eyes glinted. "The people follow strength, Lord Merrick, and courage, and the will to protect what matters, something you have never understood." The tension was electric, and Seraphine felt it in every pulse of her body. Words alone would not win this confrontation. She needed to act, to show that she was no longer the vulnerable girl thrown from the cliff, but a survivor, a fighter, a force bound to Kalen and the wild strength he embodied. Suddenly, a cry echoed through the hall. Guards previously loyal to Merrick hesitated, uncertain where their duty truly lay. Whispers spread like fire. "The Alpha King is here." The words carried power, not just fear. Kalen's hand brushed against Seraphine's, a silent promise of protection. She felt a warmth in that simple touch, a tether between them stronger than any chain of loyalty or fear. She drew a deep breath, steadying herself. "Show yourself," she said, her voice clear, carrying through the throne room. "Do not hide behind lies and fear. You thought you could end me, you failed, and now you will face the truth." Merrick's face darkened, but he saw something he did not expect in her eyes: resolve, fire, and the unmistakable presence of Kaelin's shadow beside her. The tables had turned, yet the threat remained. The confrontation escalated quickly. Kaelin's presence seemed to bend the hall itself. The air grew heavy, charged with an almost tangible energy. Guards shifted nervously. Even Merrick's allies hesitated, uncertain where their loyalty should lie. "You are reckless," Merrick hissed. "You will bring ruin to yourself and everyone here." Seraphine stepped forward, her chin raised. "I am already here, and I will not cower." Her words rang through the hall, a declaration, a challenge, a spark that ignited fear in those who had once plotted her demise. Kaelin moved closer, a dark guardian ready to strike, and yet he did not. His presence alone was enough to command silence, to bend the shadows to protect her. The tension between them was almost unbearable, a mixture of fear, defiance, and a strange, unspoken bond. "You have grown strong," Kaelin said softly, only she could hear. "Stronger than you realize." Seraphine's heart pounded, and she realized the truth in his words. The forest, the shadows, the fall from the cliff, all had shaped her, tempered her, forged her into someone capable of facing the very people who had sought her end. And yet, even as victory seemed near, the moment shifted. From the shadows of the hall, a figure stepped forward, unexpected, unannounced. An advisor she had trusted once, a face she had never doubted, but the betrayal in their eyes was undeniable. "Seraphine," the voice said softly, almost regretfully, "you should not have returned. This will end badly." Before she could react, Kaelin's instincts flared. The shadows around him moved, bending and twisting like living things, and the intruder froze, caught in a sudden, unseen force. Seraphine's pulse raced. Trust had always been fragile in her life, and here it was tested again, even in victory. The confrontation ended, but the threat remained. Merrick retreated, smirking but clearly wary, and the hall grew quiet again, filled with tension and unspoken words. Seraphine and Kaelin were left standing in the center, a silent force against the fractured throne. "Your enemies will not give up," Kaelin said, his hand brushing hers again. "And neither will the curse that touches you. It is not over." Seraphine's eyes narrowed. "Then we fight, together." Days passed, and the castle, though under their control, remained a place of quiet tension. Every corner, every shadow held a possibility of betrayal. Seraphine trained, learned, and adapted, guided by Kaelin's quiet wisdom. She began to understand the curse, not as a burden but as a test of strength, resilience, and the heart's capacity for courage and mercy. Kaelin, in turn, began to reveal pieces of his past. He was not merely a king of the wilds. He was a man shaped by loss, by power, by the weight of a curse that demanded solitude and control. Yet, in her presence, he allowed himself to feel again, to hope, to imagine that he could be more than the shadow he had always known. Their bond deepened, forged not in words alone, but in shared danger, quiet moments of understanding, and the unspoken knowledge that each relied on the other. Seraphine's heart, once heavy with betrayal and fear, began to soften. She felt a strange warmth in Kaelin's presence, a connection that went beyond survival, a bond that was unyielding, fierce, and dangerous in its intensity. But as the nights grew longer, whispers of rebellion reached the castle. Merrick had not given up. He had allies still loyal to him, men and women who sought to destroy Seraphine and reclaim the kingdom. The threat was constant, a shadow that could strike at any moment. One night, as the moon rose high above the towers, Seraphine stood on the balcony, looking out at the distant lights of villages below. Kaelin approached, his steps silent on the stone floor. "They are preparing," he said softly. The people who hunted you, who sought to end you, they gather. Soon they will move. Seraphine's jaw tightened. Then we will be ready. We have learned much. We have survived, and we will not falter. Kaelin's gaze met hers, intense and unreadable. You are ready, he said, almost reverently. But strength alone is not enough. Courage, trust, and the willingness to face the darkness within yourself, that is what will save you. The wind stirred, carrying the scent of rain and earth. In that moment, Seraphine realized the truth of his words. She had survived betrayal, a fall from a cliff, and the shadows of the forest. She had grown stronger, braver, and more capable than she had ever imagined. But the greatest challenge lay ahead, facing the fractured throne, the enemies who sought her end, and the curse that lingered like a shadow over her heart. And yet, she was not alone. Kaelin stood beside her, a dark, unwavering presence, a protector, a guide, and something more, something she did not yet fully understand but would not ignore. As the first drops of rain began to fall, the castle seemed to hold its breath. The night was heavy with tension, and the promise of danger lingered in every shadow. Seraphine knew that the coming days would test her in ways she could not yet imagine. But for the first time, she felt not fear but determination. She would face the storm. She would confront her enemies. And she would not falter, not with Kaelin by her side, not with the strength she had found within herself, and not with the bond that had begun to weave their destinies together. The throne may have been fractured, the kingdom filled with betrayal and the curse ever present, but Seraphine was no longer the girl who had fallen from the cliff. She was a survivor, a warrior, and something more, a force that the shadows themselves would respect. And as the wind howled through the towers, carrying whispers of rebellion and revenge, Seraphine knew one truth above all. The fight was only beginning. The castle was silent, heavy with anticipation. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath as Lady Seraphine and Kaelin prepared for the confrontation they both knew was coming. Outside, the storm gathered, dark clouds rolling over the kingdom like a warning. Lightning traced the jagged mountains, illuminating the battlements, and the distant sound of thunder echoed like drums announcing war. Seraphine stood on the highest tower, the wind tugging at her cloak. She had grown stronger since the fall, stronger than she had ever imagined. The forest, Kaelin, and the trials she had faced had tempered her courage into something fierce and unyielding. She felt the weight of her destiny pressing against her shoulders, yet for the first time, it was not fear that guided her, but determination. Kaelin appeared behind her, his presence dark and commanding, yet comforting. The shadows seemed to bend toward him, wrapping around him like a cloak. "They are ready," he said, his voice low, almost a growl. "Merrick has gathered his allies. They will not stop until they think the throne is theirs." Seraphine turned to face him, her eyes resolute. "Then we show them what it means to underestimate us." Kaelin nodded, his hand brushing hers in a brief, grounding gesture. "You have grown into your power," he said softly, "but the greatest challenge is not defeating them. It is facing what lies within yourself. The curse, it tests the heart, not the sword." Seraphine swallowed, feeling the truth in his words. The curse that bound her was not just a shadow over her life. It was a test of courage, resilience, and the strength to face the darkness without losing oneself. She had survived once, fallen from a cliff, and endured betrayal, but the final battle would demand more than survival. It would demand transformation. The battle began as the first rain fell, washing the castle in silver light and shadow. Merrick's forces approached, their armor gleaming in the storm, but their confidence faltered as Kaelin and Seraphine appeared together on the walls. The people of the kingdom watched from the streets, uncertain, afraid, but drawn by the undeniable presence of the Alpha King and the young lady who had defied death. "Show them the forest's strength," Kaelin commanded, his voice carrying over the chaos. The shadows around him seemed to ripple, forming shapes that moved like living armor, protecting the defenders and striking fear into the hearts of their enemies. Seraphine felt a surge of power within her, a bond with Kaelin and with the wild strength of the forest itself. She moved like a shadow, agile and focused, guiding the people who had once doubted her. Her courage became their courage, her determination their hope. The castle, once a place of fear and betrayal, now stood as a fortress of unity and resolve. The first clash came at the gate. Merrick himself rode forward, his arrogance still intact but tempered with uncertainty. He had expected to face a frightened girl, not a woman shaped by storms and shadows. "Seraphine," he shouted, his voice cutting through the wind. "This kingdom belongs to me. Step aside or be destroyed." Seraphine met his gaze, unwavering. "It never belonged to you," she replied, her voice steady and strong. "And I will not step aside for tyranny." Kaelin moved beside her, shadows twisting around his form, and together they faced the enemy. Their bond was visible in the smallest gestures, a glance, a touch, a shared understanding that neither would falter. Merrick hesitated, sensing the strength that came not from numbers but from courage and unity. The battle was fierce. Rain slicked the stone floors, and lightning illuminated the clash of steel and shadow. Seraphine moved with precision, guiding allies, defending the weak, and striking when necessary. Kaelin was a whirlwind of shadow and power, his movements both terrifying and beautiful, commanding the battlefield with skill that seemed almost supernatural. But amidst the chaos, a deeper threat emerged. The curse that had touched Seraphine stirred, a dark force testing her resolve. Shadows rose unnaturally, whispering doubts and fears into her mind. "You cannot win," they hissed. "You are not strong enough. You will fall again." Seraphine's breath caught, her vision blurring with the storm and the darkness within. For a moment, she felt herself falter, memories of the cliff, of betrayal, of fear flooding her senses. And then she felt Kaelin's hand on her shoulder, firm and grounding. "You are stronger than they believe," he said, his eyes locking with hers. "Stronger than the shadows. Believe in yourself." She closed her eyes, letting his words anchor her. The darkness within the curse tried to pull her down, but she drew on everything she had learned: the forest, the storms, her survival, and the bond she shared with Kaelin. She faced the shadows, unflinching, and the darkness recoiled, unable to claim her. With renewed strength, Seraphine moved forward, guiding a final charge against Merrick's forces. Kaelin's shadow surged beside her, a living force of protection and power. Together, they broke through the lines, Merrick's confidence crumbling with each step. The final confrontation came in the throne room. Merrick stood alone, defiant but weary, as Seraphine and Kaelin entered. "It ends here," she said, her voice carrying the weight of storms and survival. "You think you can defeat me?" Merrick demanded, though doubt flickered in his eyes. "I am the rightful ruler." Kaelin's shadow shifted behind Seraphine, a silent warning. "Power without heart is nothing," he said, his voice echoing with authority. "You have neither loyalty nor courage, only fear." Seraphine stepped forward, her presence commanding. "It is over, Merrick. The throne, the kingdom, it is not taken by fear. It is taken by those willing to protect, to endure, to face the darkness and still stand." Merrick faltered, realizing that his schemes had failed. He looked at her, the girl he had thought weak and helpless, now a force of courage and strength, bound with Kaelin in a bond of trust and power. His allies had fallen or fled, leaving him alone. "You," he whispered, disbelief and fear mingling. "You survived and you've become something more." Seraphine's eyes softened, but only slightly. "I am not what you expected," she said, "and I am not alone." The curse that had tested her heart receded, leaving only a quiet strength. Kaelin stepped beside her, a shadowed king transformed by trust and the bond they shared. Together they had faced betrayal, darkness, and fear, and they had triumphed. Merrick knelt, defeated but alive. Seraphine spared him, knowing that true power lay not in vengeance but in mercy. "Leave the kingdom," she said. "Never return." He bowed his head, understanding the weight of her words, and vanished into the stormy night. The castle, once a place of fear and betrayal, was now quiet, holding the promise of renewal. Kalen turned to Seraphine, his eyes softening. "You have done more than survive," he said. "You have become something extraordinary." Seraphine smiled faintly, exhaustion and relief mingling. "I could not have done it without you," she said. "You saved me, yes, but you also taught me to stand on my own." Kalen reached for her hand, the storm outside echoing their triumph. "And you have saved me, Seraphine. From the shadows, from the loneliness, from myself." For the first time, they allowed themselves a quiet moment, standing together atop the tower where once she had fallen. The rain had stopped, and the clouds parted to reveal the rising sun. The kingdom below was still, watching the dawn of a new era. The curse, once a shadow over their lives, had been challenged and tempered by courage, trust, and love. They had survived the storm and in doing so had transformed not just themselves, but the kingdom they now vowed to protect. Seraphine looked out at the horizon, feeling the wind in her hair, the warmth of Kalen's hand in hers. "This is only the beginning," she said quietly. Kalen nodded. "Yes, but whatever comes, we face it together. The darkness may return, the storm may rise again, but we are stronger than both." And in the rising sun, the Alpha King and the girl who had fallen from the cliff stood together, unbroken, bound by trust, courage, and a bond forged in shadows, storms, and survival. They had faced betrayal, darkness, and fear, and emerged stronger, not just as rulers but as guardians of a kingdom and of each other. The wind carried the whispers of the forest and the echoes of the storm, but Seraphine felt only hope. She had survived the fall, the curse, and the betrayal, and now she was ready to rise, fully, unafraid, and unbroken. The kingdom was theirs not by birthright but by courage, by heart, and by the bond that no shadow could break. Together they faced the dawn.